Thank you very much, Trevor, for that kind introduction. And thanks everyone for your attention today and for what you do for open source and the Yocto project. My name is Jay Kruemcke. I'm at Wind River Systems as a product line manager for our Linux products. And I've been here for about a year now. Before that, I was at SUSE, and before that, I was at IBM. So I've certainly been in the open source community for quite a while, more on the product side rather than on the coding side. As Trevor indicated, there are a lot of companies that develop commercial products based on Yocto Project, and they have some requirements beyond actually just getting the code out there and having the devices execute. And so what Wind River has evolved and continues to evolve to do is to meet the needs of those companies, to provide them with support and other capabilities so that they know that they can develop their products and be able to maintain them over a fairly long period of time. If we look at why we're doing this, it's really around this edge computing market. And this is one of those little factoids about how big the market is. But the reality is that intelligent edge products are really kind of transforming the way that we live today. If you look at things like smart speakers, for example, I couldn't do without them anymore. It's everything from playing music to doing my grocery store list. So this is a market that's only going to accelerate. If you look at things, beyond just the home devices, but devices in automotive, in aircraft, and in industrial environments, this is a huge market and it continues to grow. But, it is a complex market in a lot of ways. There are a lot of challenges that are faced by edge solution developers. One of the key ones is time to market. How quickly can someone get started, write their applications, get their device chosen, get it deployed out into the business, into the market, particularly when there's competition out there. So time to market is a big factor for a lot of people. They want to get there as quickly as possible. And then one of the key components of their solution is the hardware. So where do they get the hardware? How do they source it? What does it cost? One of the things that I saw in a article in IEEE Spectrum just this week is that with the supply constraints that we've been seeing with microcontrollers, design choices used to be independent of procurement, and now they tend to be very intertwined, which is why you see companies like, for example, Tesla, who had supply constraints on one end, they rewrote their software to use a different platform. So portability has become much more important in kind of today's market. Now, these devices range from very small devices with a minimal amount of memory to things that are effectively server platforms. But memory and device constraints are a key part of this. You have to pick your platform that can kind of hit the price point you need and provide the capabilities, but not much more than that. And then once you've deployed this, once you've got it out into the market and people are using it, you have to worry about long-term maintenance. Things like, CVEs. How do I address CVEs to make sure that I haven't put some sort of exposed device into someone's home, or worse yet, into an automobile or an aircraft? Compliance and export is one of those things that we don't always think of kind of first thought to mind when developing something. But the reality is, if you're going to be deploying devices commercially, you have to worry about the licenses that are in the source code files. You have to worry about export compliance and things like that. And then finally, everybody needs some help. You can't do it all at once. Obviously, the community can provide a lot of assistance, but there are times when you need more than just technical assistance with a particular question, where you actually need somebody to help you do some of the activities. So a lot of different challenges there. This is only a subset, but it is a complex environment. Now, what we've seen over the past few years is that people that were using proprietary RTOSes and things like that are really trying to go to Linux. Around 62% of embedded market today is Linux, and that continues to grow. I see customer interest from, for applications that used to be only available for RTOS. And as the Linux capabilities kind of increase and we get standards to help drive compliance and things like that, we just see Linux continuing to grow. So Linux is absolutely the bedrock of what we see today, and it's going to continue to increase over time. Now, one of the challenges with Linux, is its very configurability. If I'm on a little bitty tiny machine that just has a few hundred megabytes worth of space, then I really need to be focused on, how much space my operating system takes. And similarly, if I'm interested in something that needs to be near real time, then I'm going to worry about things like thread latency. And these are all things that Linux can accomplish, but it does require kind of different customization to get there. And that is really one of the key reasons why Yocto Project was created, was really to support this diversity of workloads on a diversity of platforms. So it's really all about customization and providing just the right amount of operating system functionality to support a particular workload. Now, Linux, Yocto Project is obviously the foundation for Wind River Linux. This is a kind of a view of some of the things that we provide, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. But typically, most of our customers started out with a real desire to get support. In some cases, there are commercial requirements. They have to have a supported operating system. In other cases, it's a business that looks at, I'm going to deploy a device and I'm going to have it out in the market like for 15 years. Do I want to have engineers tied up maintaining the OS underneath that? Is there a better way for me to do that, a more cost-effective way? So that's really where Wind River Linux came from, is really from this desire to provide commercial support. But, as time went on, we saw there were other things we needed to do. We needed to provide for, development platforms. And we've been doing a lot in that particular area, not just OS development, but actually the total solution development on there. We've included technologies, DevOps in particular, into our development process, and we make that available to our customers as well. But, the reality here is what we're doing is providing kind of the commercial infrastructure for someone to build an application on Yocto Project and be able to have that supported and maintained and managed for them without having to put a lot of engineers to work on this. And I'll talk a little bit more about platform support in a moment, but that's one of the key areas where we provide capabilities, is in platform support. Now, Wind River Linux started out as essentially a Yocto Project-based distro builder. Over time, we evolved that into something we call LTS, for long-term support. That is kind of the core of what we do at Wind River around Linux. But over time, we've adapted and used other technologies brought to the market to help out a wider range of customers. So one of them is our continuous delivery release. So Wind River Linux itself is a periodically dropped product. So we come out with a new release of Wind River LTS about every year. And we'll continue to do that because we have requirements for customers that need to be able to use the latest kernel, the latest technology that's out there. And some of those customers actually really want to be on the bleeding edge, or they have requirements that force them to be on the edge. So we instituted a continuous delivery process and continuous integration, where we do a sprint about every 3 weeks. And any code that ends up in Wind River Linux, the LTS release, goes through our continuous delivery release first. And we do have a number of customers that are using that. Kind of typically the way that customers, the reasons why they would use our CD release, they won't deploy it to devices, but it allows them to work with kind of emerging platforms, hardware platforms where they're evolving very quickly. For example, the NXP S32G has been evolving over the past year or so, and it's been evolving pretty quickly. So we needed a way to be able to provide customers with the ability to access those type of devices. And then there are the enterprise type customers that are looking at the CD release as a way for them to cut the learning curve when they move towards the next LTS release. Because every time we come out with a new LTS release, it first shows up as an as our CD in our CD release. So it gives people the opportunity to make sure that their customizations actually will work in the new environment. So it helps to cut down the migration challenge. Now, recently, in the last year, we introduced something called Wind River Linux Distro. So it's actually a binary distribution that we created based on the Wind River LTS release. And we did this because we identified that a number of customers don't really have the requirement to build Linux from scratch, and especially don't have necessarily the resources. They just want to pick up a distro that's enabled for their particular hardware and use that with some additional customization. So we introduced this over the last year. We just made it commercially available for a set of platforms, and we're starting to see some interest there. And I understand that Yocto Project is also looking at doing a binary distro type release, and probably for the same reasons. There are some customers out there that simply don't need that much customization. Now, one of the things that we recently just introduced is something called Studio Linux Services. And effectively what Studio Linux Services are is a set of kind of pre-packaged services that can help customers that are using Wind River Linux, but also that can help customers that are just using Yocto Project Linux. In other words, they can provide some of the services in CVE management, support, maintenance, those kinds of things for people who are using Yocto Project Linux directly. And so this is a new way to address a larger group of customers. And as Trevor said, there's a large number of companies that are out there today providing services around Yocto Project. This is one of the ways that we can broaden our reach beyond just what our products. Now, if you look at how we get from Yocto Project to Wind River Linux, you can see that periodically Yocto Project will come out with a release. We have tended to standardize now on the spring release of Yocto Project because that will include the latest LTS kernel update. And then we will move that to our CD release. It'll become the basis for our next major LTS version. And then that flows down, as you can see there, through our base release, which is really our GitHub access to the source code. So even if you don't purchase Wind River Linux from us, all the source that we provide out there goes into what's called the base release, and then that becomes the kind of the platform for our LTS release. So as you can see here, about every year or so, we're dropping a new LTS release. Each one of those releases receives periodic updates. We call those RCPLs, or rolling cumulative patch levels. That happens about every month for the first year, every couple of months for the second year that the product's been in the market, and then decreases over time. But the idea is that periodically we will provide new updates and a lot of times new capabilities, particularly in the hardware space, via an RCPL. Now, you'll notice there at the bottom, we have the Wind River Linux distro. This is the binary distro that we introduced this year. It also provides, support for a variety of hardware, and we deliver updates to it via OS tree. And so that was one of the major changes that we've done over the past couple of years. Is we've been using OS tree, and to some extent, with LTS 21, we integrated OS tree completely across all platforms, and now we use that as the basis for fixes that go out to the Wind River Linux distro. And we'll talk more about the distro in a moment. So if you look at what we bring, I've talked about some of these things already. Obviously, we provide a lot of community participation and contribution. So we get fixes. We do a lot of upstreaming of fixes, a lot of upstreaming of hardware support and corrections and things like that. So we're tied very tightly to the Yocto project. But we are providing commercial support, as I've mentioned, up to 10 years minimum. And we can go beyond that. We certainly have customers beyond that. The CD release that I talked about, the export management, the documentation, and a number of other services that we can provide. And I think that's one of the things that's unique about Wind River compared to some of the enterprise distros, is that we actually have a very, very skilled professional services staff that basically can do almost anything that you might need help with. And they've done everything from accelerate a BSP to managing projects for long periods of time. So we really have a lot of capabilities in that professional services organization. And that's why we decided to come out with the Studio Linux services as a way to make that a little bit less statement of work type driven and more kind of commercially packaged. Now, excuse me, want to talk a little bit about board support packages. And this is, I will tell you, as the product manager for Linux at Wind River, this is probably the biggest headache I have. First off, you have a lot of different vendors and architectures, and not only are there different vendors and architectures, but those vendors' relationship to open source varies quite a bit. When do they have code that they don't upstream? Do they, in some cases, upstream incompatible changes? We've had cases where a particular company had two different devices and they actually had updates that they wanted to upstream that were incompatible. So that's stuff that we have to deal with when we try to bring it into the product as a commercially supported BSP. The different vendors have different update cycles for their SDKs. And so, for example, newer boards like, say, the Octeon 10 CN106XX or the S32G from NXP are really, undergoing kind of active hardware development. So, they're adding a lot of stuff to their SDK, and we have to go, take that input and provide those capabilities to our customers. So BSPs are not a one and done thing. They are absolutely an ongoing process. In fact, I'd asked Randy earlier this week about how much BSP code is hit by CVEs. And it turns out it can be anywhere from 10 to 20% of CVEs actually impact BSP code. So it's definitely not a static type thing. And, we've got a large group of very skilled people that can manage this. They have a lot of hardware resources for, we test everything that goes out the door multiple times. But, it is a challenge. This is one of the biggest areas we have. Now, I'll tell you, it is getting better. Some of the vendors have become a bit better about upstreaming their work as opposed to just putting stuff into their SDK and their own forked source tree. But it is still a complex task. And the fact is, it's always changing. We're getting more hardware every day. And you'll notice that in some of these releases here, like under LTS 21, you'll see some things that would say release. So that went out with the GA product, the original product. But there were a lot of BSPs that get delivered via RCPLs. And we have a lot of platforms here. We're pretty mercenary in which platforms we support, and that is driven entirely by business opportunity. So, if we have customers that want to use a particular platform, then we'll evaluate, the demand for it before we can kind of commit the resources. Because as you can see, this list is large and getting larger. So we have to be careful, to only do things that are kind of commercially relevant for us. This is something that, is increasing over time. We're going to increase the number of BSPs, but things like RISC-V, for example, where we really haven't seen the commercial demand for it yet. I think that's one of those things that's a bit of a chicken or egg type problem. If the BSP was there, we provide it. If the demand was there, we it's kind of that chicken or egg. But there are cases where we actually see the vendor step in. I'll point out that Intel Agilus F was a new platform that Intel came out with. The vendor actually came to us and said, could you produce a BSP for that? And they assisted us with doing that because the vendor realized that, if somebody like Wind River is commercially supporting that platform, it makes it more attractive to their customers. Now, I mentioned the distro earlier. I said the real reason behind this is that we knew that we had customers that didn't really want to go through the time and the effort of building their own Linux from source, but they did want to have a customizable Linux that they could deploy on these devices, particularly, obviously the Intel large processors, the commercial COT servers. Those are important, but there are a lot more MCU type platforms out there that are really effective. So we introduced this. We're offering commercial support for a subset of these platforms. You can go to this today and download it. We provide 2 images for every platform that we support. One is a very minimal image, so it's the smallest as possible, and one is a larger image that has a lot of capabilities built into it. And we provide a number of tools. One of them is called the Linux assembly tool that customers can use to customize their environment. We also provide a package feed so you can add additional packages to this. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is one of the new things that we have delivered this year. And really, when customers come to me and they say, well, which one should I choose? A lot of times I really ask them about, what's the degree of customizability you need? If you need full control over the kernel in particular, then it's probably best for you to pick our LTS product. That's the Yocto project-based source builder. And there's other advantages there, like tracking customizations, for example, and other things. But for customers that don't need that degree, maybe they only need a simple device driver or something like that, there are ways to do that with the distro and use that. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've been doing a lot of investment in helping solution developers really achieve much better productivity in developing and deploying systems. So the old days where an OS guy did the OS, and then the app guy came in and tried to build an application on top of that, and then somebody else had to worry about deploying it or managing it. We're really trying to integrate that all together in our Wind River Studio. So this is a full, complete lifecycle management for systems. You can see it's everything from the development side to the deployment side, operations and services. So this is really a different way to develop embedded solutions. And we've got a number of large customers on this already, and we're continuing to build this out. We'll certainly hear more about this. In fact, I think we just won an award for this as the most exciting new product. So Wind River Studio, full, complete lifecycle management for embedded systems. Now, I mentioned earlier, we have this Studio Linux services. These are kind of prepackaged services where we can help a customer out that's using Yocto Project or even using Wind River Linux for some of these kind of particular things like scanning and finding security and compliance issues. That's something that we do with Wind River Linux. It's not something that you get out of the box with the Yocto project, but we provide that, and we can do it for long support intervals. Getting updates, managing lifecycle. There's a lot of work we can do there. And in fact, one of our use cases is somebody who has developed an application on Yocto Project. They've deployed it out to the market, and they realize that they've tied up a lot of their skilled developers in maintaining that system after they've deployed it. And so rather than them having to do that, we can come in, provide those services, and then customers will be able to take those resources, those skilled engineers, and put them to work on things that's kind of more customer value. So I hope you've gotten an idea of really what we provide here with Wind River Linux. We are certainly based and tied very closely to Yocto Project, and this is why we are one of the leading contributors to the project. But we're really providing kind of the extra layer of stuff that commercial organizations need on top of their customized Linux. And so security, reliability, performance, et cetera, those are all things that we help customers achieve when they're building their environment from source. And that's it for now.